Well, we've been talking about these big ideologies that have been completely shaping and dominating our culture right now. We've talked about postmodernism, we've talked about Marxism, and then we've also looked into the critical theories, which try and reveal hidden assumptions and try and reveal these biases in society that are supposedly there, and they're kind of like sophisticated conspiracy theories, really, is what they are, where there's just this shadowy group of people that are perpetuating oppression, and you could be perpetuating oppression and not even know it, you know. And, you know, even if you're not doing anything intentionally, you're a part of that system, and it seeks to uproot everything, right?
Yeah. And some of those things are probably true, right? There's probably like implicit biases we have, but the solution is destroy the entire system, right? Like completely remake it into, you know, communism or whatever. Right. Often the solution is never often given.
Yes.
It's just like, you need to give us power. Give these certain people power so they can remake it in their own image.
Totally.
And that's terrifying. But.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, be sure to watch the videos on those too. And then today we're going to be talking about gender studies. So Brandon, tell us, what is gender studies and how is gender studies different from feminism?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously they're very related, and in a lot of these terms that we're using, just so in case you're not clear, fat studies, queer theory, all these things, these are not our terms. I would have never called something fat studies or queer theory. So these are just terms that are used in the academy, right? Yeah. So that's all we're doing here. So gender studies, we talked a lot about these kinds of topics over the last year. So I was considering, should we even include this in this series? I think it's important to include it, but we're not going to deal with all of the ins and outs of this. So if you want to check out our video on, it's just titled Transgenderism and Christianity. That's a great video. We kind of go through a lot of scriptures in terms of how we should approach that topic. Also, our video, Should a Christian Use Preferred Pronouns? I think is super helpful in addressing one of the most pressing issues, which is, well, how do I interact with somebody who views reality this way as if they are the opposite sex of how God created them?
Right. Like but nowadays, I feel like that's a very prevalent question.
Yes. I'm always asking it. Right? Yeah. And I've seen a lot of people actually recently change their views to actually align with the view that we propose, which is not unique to us. But a lot of people who are saying, oh man, I used to think this was loving, and now I realize it's actually destructive. So,
well, with all this stuff, right, we're kind of slowly learning that you start to indulge it a little bit, and then they just pull you in more and more and more, and it's never enough until you,
Absolutely. So gender studies, to get to your question, is what it sounds like, right? And it's based on this idea that gender is a social construct, and it's the examination of gender, and especially gender stereotypes in cultures, right? Yeah. And if you combine postmodernism and how it's undermined any objective truth with the development of these critical theories, it's natural that gender would be the next thing to be undermined as a category of objective truth.
Right.
And so we've dealt with this topic when we discuss queer theory and we talk about feminism, but I think the transgender movement is such a huge movement that deserves to be treated more specifically in terms of, I don't want to deal necessarily with all the passages on it as much as I do about how we're seeing it in our culture and why that's so important and why it's so destructive. Right. So there's actually been a shift in our culture in terms of feminism, moving from that to gender studies more generally, because I heard for the first time yesterday, after we had already filmed our talk on third wave feminism, I heard the term fourth wave feminism and how that's now starting to be used. Because
it's hard to keep up.
Because again, Mike kind of addressed this, but it's more and more becoming a reality, is that gender studies essentially is denying that men and women exist as any sort of objective category. So now we just hear about the gender spectrum. So the gender binary would be men and women. That's bad, right? There's not such a thing as a binary. There's a whole spectrum, a whole rainbow of different shades of everything, right? There is male and female, but there's also everything in between, which we've talked about a little bit before. But and these categories of men and women are not real. They're just made up to oppress people. Is kind of the idea. And of course, there's always a game that's played with now we talk about sex and gender as being separate things. Those terms have always meant the same thing, right? There's this thing in language called synonyms, and when a word is different, but it actually means the same thing as another word. So those have always been synonyms,
right?
And now we try to act as if gender has always meant something different from sex. So we say sex is the physical reality, but gender is this thing that's malleable and it's culturally based and all these things.
Right.
But then we also try to argue, our culture does, that this gender can also then cause you to change your physical sex.
Right.
It's completely convoluted and ridiculous, but it's playing fast and loose with language to the destruction of people.
Well, the more that we get into all this stuff, and we might touch on more of this in this video, but you see how all these different ideologies are in such conflict with one another, right? Like the idea, like, boys they should be able to wear girls' clothing or whatever, and then the second they do, it's like, well, you're probably transgender. You probably are,
Yeah,
So
and we'll get to that.
Exactly,
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
So these first, just some examples in our culture, because it's shocking to me that a lot of people still don't really see this. They hear some guys like us talking about, they're like, oh, it's these conservative guys just like, going crazy over nothing. Does this even ever happen? I was just talking to someone, and he brought up Drag Queen Story Hour with a more liberal friend, and the friend was like, that doesn't even happen.
And if it is, it's a good thing.
Yes, exactly. And we should fight for the right to do it. And it's great. But yeah, there's a lot of people that just, their head is so in the sand, and maybe that's you watching. I know when I was a college student, we got a lot of college students watching. When I was a college student, I was very unaware politically. I was like, oh, everything's going good in the world. So I had to start learning and reading on my own. And if you go to UC Santa Cruz, it's very likely that you're only hearing liberal sources. So they're going to tell you what they want you to hear. But the examples are legion. I mean, there's so many different examples we could point to, right? From obviously the transgender athlete push, which is happening. A lot of men beating a lot of women in a lot of sports, but they call themselves women, so it's okay.
Right.
Weightlifting. Did you see this video of the man, clearly a man, like extremely masculine, breaking the women's record as a quote unquote woman? And the record holder was watching him, and the record holder was also a man.
Wow.
But I think that man had long hair, so he was at least, giving a little bit of effort to it.
Oh,
but
my goodness.
That is a crazy thing, right? And it was I think the guy who broke it was an older man, so he wouldn't have been able to compete in the male division, but he went in and broke the women's world record.
Right.
There's transgender prisoners, right? This is becoming a common thing because most prisoners are men, and if you're going to go, if you go to a male prison, well, you could be, right, you could be abused, you could be beaten. But if you're a man and you go to women's prison, then you can be the top dog because you have more physical strength on average. New York Post had an article, this is from April 14th, 2022. New Jersey women's prison inmates pregnant after sex with transgender prisoner. So again, this in the world's view, right, in this new way of thinking, a woman had sex with other women and had a baby, right? Wow, how did that happen? Yeah. Amazing, right? And of course, what happened, this is in the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility in New Jersey, but 2 different inmates have become pregnant, and it seems like they're arguing that it was consensual, but there's been a lot of accounts of these men dressed as women raping women in these prisons. And just in the last few weeks, right, we had a pregnant man, quote unquote, on the cover of Glamour magazine in honor of Pride Month, the holy month of Pride.
Yes.
And Target pushing transgender clothing for children with some clothing items that said Satan respects pronouns. They're explicitly satanic. We could talk about all the men who have won Woman of the Year awards.
Yeah.
So it turns out that men are actually the best women out there.
I guess so.
Wow. Yeah, it's like, and people are saying, right, the patriarchy wins. If there is some conspiracy to degrade and devalue women, what better way than for men to come and to receive all the accolades of being a woman?
Yeah.
It's crazy right now.
Well, I just want to add to something that you kind of touched on a second ago, which is the idea that like there was a while ago where like these ideals were popping up, and there were some Christians sounding the alarm, right? Saying, if we go along with this, it'll lead to this, 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 and this. And for all you college students, again, specifically, I was one of those people who said, I think the Christians are like, we can make too big a deal of some things. There's no way it'll snowball to that level. The idea of like transgenderism a little while ago, like even my liberal friends, would be like, no, that's not going to happen. Look where we are, look what this whole month is like dedicated to, and like the kind of parades that are in the streets, and how this is affecting our children. And it's, when you go along with sin, it's never going to stop. Yeah. Right. There's never going to be a point where people are like, okay, we're done sinning at this point. We won't go there. Like, no, it'll always go.
Well, further. Idols always demand more sacrifices.
Yes.
They always demand more. So you think you can go a little ways, and then they say, no, you need to put that on the altar too. You need to put that until you've given everything you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right. So, and especially with just even something as minor as saying something untrue, that never ends. If there's people in your life that are pressuring you to say something untrue, to believe something untrue, you need to draw a clear line with them and say in love that you're not going to go along with that because the truth matters.
Yeah.
Even if they go, well, why does it matter? Who cares? Why does it hurt you? The truth always matters. Right. And so we stand for the truth.
Yeah. That argument of, how does it hurt you? How does it affect you? Right. I think there were a lot of people who used to believe that. And now I would hope that more and more people are seeing like it will hurt you. It will affect you. It will affect your family, your children.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, there was, again, not to get, there's like a million things we could point to, but these pride parades that were happening earlier in June, there was accounts, a video, you see it of people passing out sex toys to children at a quote unquote family friendly pride event.
Yeah.
Men with their, butts displayed. It's like, how do you say it, right? Spanking each other, like all sorts of things where you're just like, okay, now I wish I had never seen that. But we have to be honest that this is what is happening publicly and brazenly. Yeah. And there's an agenda behind it. And we'll get to that in a second. But before we get to that, I think, okay, so in terms of gender studies and this feminism and transgender ideology, the point you made earlier is a good one. These are philosophically mutually exclusive categories.
Yes.
They are. So, and this is what's so incredible to me is how people can profess to be both a feminist and to be pro-transgender.
Right.
And they don't see that these movements, they're at odds in every point except for one. And that one point that they have in common is that they hate scripture and traditional values, right? Moral values. Other than that, feminism and transgenderism are opposite, right? Think about it. So again, feminism, we defined it in third wave feminism. We're not talking about the right to vote for women, okay? We're talking about this, radically pro-abortion, pro-promiscuity. Women should essentially be worse versions of men, the worst versions of the worst men, I guess is how I say it. But feminism would say that women and men are basically the same, right? That a woman can do anything that a man can do. And it would say that women aren't defined by certain culturally determined things like liking the color pink or cooking, right? Or whatever. Yeah. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? There's a lot of truth to that those things are culturally defined. And so it's not as if those things make you a woman.
Right.
The one of the problems that we see in feminism, though, is that it tends to degrade the good things that set women apart from men.
Yeah.
One of those fundamental things, obviously, is bearing and raising children.
Yeah.
Women are specifically
now?
Women are specifically designed for quite possibly one of the most important tasks of humankind, which is bearing and raising children. They have these incredible superpowers in that realm, right? Their bodies are fine-tuned in so many ways. It's amazing having seen my wife, give birth and the way that she could care for the kids. So feminism tends to define women, the things that are valued in women, the aspirations of women are essentially masculine values that are then placed on women who, by and large, are never going to excel as much in those same things. And as a result, women always end up being essentially second-class men. That's what feminism does to women. It says, don't care about things that are actually built into you, like having kids or caring for people or whatever. You should want to be in a STEM field or a high-powered CEO or whatever, right? And none of those things are sinful for a woman to do. Don't hear me saying that. But most women aren't built that way.
Yeah.
Most women don't have the physical strength of men or the incredible drive to accomplish that a lot of men do.
Yeah.
Right? Men are meant to be those builders, providers, protectors. Women aren't as good at being firefighters or at being military, again, by and large. We're talking about, there's a range of aptitudes. But so feminism, defines men and women this way, and it tends to, I think, devalue womanhood. But get back to the original point, it says that those kind of external things don't make you a woman or not. And in that regard, it's right. Then transgenderism comes along and says the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? It says that if you feel a certain way as a man, you must be a woman.
Yeah.
So the question, the natural question we all should ask is to these men who say they feel like a woman, what does feeling like a woman mean? Like, can you define that for me?
Yeah.
What is it that's so clear, so objective that you can say, I'm actually a woman? And what they'll point to, if they can point to anything, is I like pink and I like to cook. And
It's like a caricature.
it's a caricature of women. Yeah. So you
Yeah.
take on this ridiculous stereotype of what it means to be a woman. It's always the most extreme, ridiculous versions, right? So look at every drag queen. They're not like subtle like women can be in their beauty. They're this ridiculous, over the top caricature of woman. It's woman face,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Like blackface,
it is.
it's woman face. Yeah.
Well, I would just say it's so interesting because you see a lot of parents doing this evil to their children, right? Who are obviously so impressionable. And what you see happening is it used to be, it's like, oh, you conservatives or whatever, like my kid's a boy, but like he can play with a doll. It's like, okay, but it turns out that like it's the people who are pushing transgenderism that like are pushing the stereotypes, right? Yeah. Because you see these parents that are like, well, when my son played with that doll, that's when I knew that he was transgender.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
So
I thought you were telling me that just boys could do that. Apparently not.
Apparently not. So it's this ridiculous. They're mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You can't say the one thing and then also believe the other.
Right.
I saw a meme saying something that you probably seen the meme, but something to the effect of, it said, traditional view, women should wash the dishes. Feminist view, anyone can wash the dishes. And then transgender view, whoever washes the dishes is a woman.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's what you're talking about, right? Like, as soon as you pick up that doll, you are now a woman.
Yeah.
Because a woman is defined by a stereotype. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy. So the only thing they seem to have in common, feminism and transgenderism, radical feminism and gender studies and transgenderism, is that they want the destruction of traditional values.
Yeah.
And they're typically, again, opposed to specifically Christianity. Is what it seems like.
Well, and you have to speak to that too, right? If you have these women who maybe their more natural bent would be to the more traditional lifestyle, right? Like, they might, want to just have a family and raise kids, but if the world is telling them like, no, that's bad. What you want to do is you want to just be a CEO or something like that, right? Well, then if they go down that path, I think what a lot of women are sadly finding that they're not feeling fulfilled. And then they're at a point in their life where maybe sadly they can't have kids anymore, or they just realize that they're not feeling fulfilled in that lifestyle at all.
Exactly.
And because they bought into the lies of the world that you have to do these, more typically masculine things to be happy.
Yeah. And so women are getting to their 50s and they're looking at their life and they're going, I've accomplished everything and I can be proud of, but they don't feel satisfied. Yeah. And it's because, again, this lie that we're giving, and we're going back to feminism, but is, that if you have these sort of stereotypical masculine traits, you're going to be happy. And they're even often like traits that I wouldn't encourage in men. Promiscuity being one. Right. But also this worship of your work. While men are more, I think they should be focusing on their work more than women. They still shouldn't worship their work and find satisfaction fully in it. But people get to the age of 50 and they're going, I have nothing left. I'm empty and I'm depressed, and it's very, very sad because they bought what the world was selling. And our hope is that for you, young men and women, I know a lot of you listening to this, like I said, are college students. don't believe this. See through it. It's so obviously untrue.
Yeah.
So look at those in your life who have followed these different viewpoints and see what the conclusion is of that. By and large, are the people that the husband is working hard to provide and the wife is focusing on giving a great life to her kids and raising them up. Are those people flourishing? Are they more happy long term versus those who go this other route and say, I don't need a man, or obviously I can change my gender? Those people are some of the most tragic stories, because so often they're just chewed up and spit out by the world, and they're just completely broken.
So sad.
It's very tragic. So we should talk, though, some basic principles for how to approach this. So some basic principles. So one is, and I think we've made this clear in past videos, but it needs to be said again, which is Christians, as we've said, can agree that race is a social construct. So we don't disagree with critical race theory on that, even though there's a lot of problems with critical race theory. But we should vehemently disagree that gender is a social construct, or that it's some sort of spectrum of different things.
Right.
The Bible is so clear about God, what the image of God is, and that it includes male and female. And again, we go back to Genesis chapter 1, because so many problems in our lives, so many questions that we have could be solved if people just read the first chapter of the Bible.
Yeah.
And they saw there's a God who created, there's order and beauty and intention. And one of those things that changes everything about how we see humanity is the image of God, right? Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So male and female is affirmed on the first page of the Bible. Well, it's the second page in my Bible, but the first chapter of the Bible. And it's affirmed every other step of the way. It's never changed. There's male and female. And yes, of course, some people struggle with that, just like we struggle with all kinds of things.
Right.
But the solution to that is not to play God. It's not to try to change your gender. It's to worship God fully and to learn how to appreciate the good gift that he's given to you. And that is the image of God, and it's expressed in part through gender.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, because we already touched on the idea that these ideologies are always so in conflict with one another, right?
Yeah. But
then we look to Scripture, and everything, there's just such a harmony there. Right? Like it all agrees with itself. There's never any contradiction in Scripture.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
It coheres.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is I think something that is unique about Christianity is that it perfectly coheres, whereas every other worldview breaks down and it becomes illogical and ridiculous.
Yeah.
So the next thing I would say is Christians need to see clearly the agenda that is present in this movement. So at this moment, in this movement, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to touch on this again specifically, is not because this is the most important topic in the world, but because right now in our culture, I think a lot of Christians are unaware that there is an agenda. Yeah. And I can't point to the specific people. A lot of these people probably aren't public people, but there clearly are people that are pushing for something that they know will be destructive to humanity. Ultimately, this is something that is led by Satan himself. Satan is thrilled with what's happening with our views of sexuality and gender. So again, I would separate out the people who are suffering and who are mentally ill or have bought into the lies of the culture from those who are leading this movement. Because always people are going to misconstrue this, right?
Right.
That I'm saying everyone who suffers from this or who is sinning in this way is this vile person. No, I think people are deceived and they're being mistreated by the world. But there are people who understand the destruction that's being caused here. And I think those are many of the people that are pushing for it.
Yeah.
I don't think our president is unaware of how much of a lie this is for him to host Dylan Mulvaney and to pretend that this is a woman in front of him or to push, transgender visibility, whatever, right? He understands. Right. He's smart enough to understand that this is destructive. It's a lie.
Right.
And I think what's behind this is, as you said, it's Satan ultimately, right? He is the god of this world in the sense that God's given him a certain amount of control and he's worshipped. But we also can point to specific things. I've been seeing a lot recently. I'm surprised that people are now becoming more aware of things like ESG scores.
Oh yeah.
I hadn't heard much about that, and I knew about that though, but I hadn't heard it in a mainstream way. Which of course, ESG is economic social governance. So the whole idea is there's certain big organizations that assign scores to different companies on the basis of how well they promote diversity in the workplace, and so companies do things like what Target did, and what Bud Light did, and others. They do that because it allows them to raise their score, and therefore it allows them to develop partnerships with different big firms that can give them big money, financing, whatever. So it helps them in a lot of different ways. So essentially you have people who are kind of, I don't know, they're like these people that can give you a status that then opens up or closes doors for you depending on whether you have it or not. It's pretty crazy.
We should ask them to come raid our church.
Wonder what our ESG score is.
I know.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know, man. We can see. But Satan's always been in the business of trying to get people to play God.
Yeah.
That was his first move, and it'll be his last move, and it's every move in between. It's trying to make you believe, as he said in the garden, right, that you will be like God. And what better way to deceive someone and to say that they can be like God than to control something that is at your essence, something that you can't quite put a finger on. It's more than just body parts, and that is male and female.
Yeah,
something about the image of God within you. So that's what it's all about. It's about trying to get people to believe that they can be God instead of worshiping the true God. That's the agenda behind this.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing too. If people aren't convinced of these ideologies, right, then they're going to pressure people to just go along with it too. You know, so there's so many reasons why this kind of stuff is becoming so prevalent, and it comes down to these things are idols.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Exactly. The next thing I would say is Christians must refuse to promote lies.
Yeah.
And so much of this depends upon everyone going along with it. Everyone being in fear of that powerful company or whatever, that powerful group or political whims, whatever, and therefore promoting the lie. If people stopped promoting the lie, this movement would be done in a minute.
Yep. Yeah.
Everyone would have said, nope, that's not true.
Yep. King has no
I'm
clothes.
not gonna. Yeah, the emperor has no clothes, and that's it, right? Alexander Solzhenitsyn said it really well, and I think he was talking about communism, given his context, but it's true in our world as well. He said this: they lie to us, we know they're lying, they know we know they're lying, but they keep lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them. That is unreal, and that's exactly what's happening. Everyone knows this is a lie, and yet for some reason they could tell us, right, certain powerful people, certain influential people could say that up is down is down is up. They could say that the sky is purple or whatever, and we would agree with them. That's how we're conditioned in our culture. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
And so Christians, even if everyone else is buying into the lies and promoting the lies and going along with it, Christians have to be those who refuse to go along with the lies.
Right.
And none of that, again, means anything like doing violence or being cruel or rude or any of that stuff. It just means, no, I'm not going to go along with that lie. I'm not going to wear that pin. I'm not going to put my pronouns in my bio. I'm not, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to endorse this craziness. Yeah. And then the last thing is Christians have to remember that we're playing the long game. Because we're talking about real souls, real people, these poor people who've been lied to about their identity, who've said that they're on the spectrum and that they can find happiness through drugs or mutilating their bodies or whatever it might be. Many of these people will come back in the future. And of course, it'll be so tragic that a lot of them will lose the ability to have kids, right? There's going to be some real permanent damage here. But there is eternal hope for these folks, right? That God can redeem these stories, that they'll be devastated and realize that after all those years of being in this lifestyle, the only people who actually loved them were the people who told them the truth. Thanks so much for watching this video. We're uploading great biblical content every single week, so make sure you subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment down below. We'd love to discuss with you. If you want to support us financially, there's a link in the description of this video. Thanks so much.